Hey there, hope you're having a wonderful day. In this video, we'll be coding a calculator in Python. So there are a lot of calculator tutorials out there, but they all use the eval function. For our calculator, we will be coding out all the operations. So we will not be using the eval functions. And there are two reasons for that. The first reason is to develop your programming skills. So it is much better to write out all the operations instead of relying on a single function. And the second reason is the eval function takes a string and runs that string as if it were a line of code. And because string is basically text, it can easily be manipulated. So by using the eval function, you would be introducing vulnerabilities. But for a small project like this one, the eval function isn't really a big issue. So the main issue is just you want to improve your programming abilities. So we will be writing out the logic ourselves. Okay, so we have the calculator here and I can press the buttons. So if I do 24.75 times 54.32 and I press equal, you can see we get our result. I can do positive, negative, and I can take the percentage of it. So this is dividing by 100 and I can subtract 5 and I can clear. So this is the calculator that we'll be working on today. Alright, so very quickly, I just want to mention that I am working on various tutorials on my channel, and you can find the list of tutorials on tkinter.com. So here I have programming basics in Python and C++, and I'm working on Python projects. So this one is the calculator, and on my channel, I already have the snake game and tic-tac-toe tutorial on my channel. And I will continue to add Python projects tutorials on my channel. But in the meantime, you can check out my other projects in Java. So I have Java game tutorials. So I have a tutorial on Sudoku, Pac-Man, Flappy Bird, Blackjack, calculator as well. And I have a ton of other tutorials in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I have Doodle Jump. I have Pac-Man coming soon. I have Flappy Bird here, Chrome Dinosaur Game, 2048, Sudoku, Candy Crush, and so on. So you can find the list of tutorials on my channel as well as on tkinter.com. And if you want to stay up to date for more tutorials, make sure you subscribe to the channel. So let's begin coding. And for the coding environment, I will be using Visual Studio Code. If you want to learn how to set up Python with Visual Studio Code, I have a tutorial on that and I'll link it in the video description below. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is import tkinter or tkinter. And this is going to be our graphical user interface library. Next, we want to set up our calculator. So I'm going to copy and paste over here. And this is going to be the structure of our buttons layout. So here you can see I have the button values and it's going to be a 2D list. So in our list, we have 5 other lists. So each list is a row. And you can see we have these buttons on the top, and then on the side, we have the operators. So I singled them out and created separate lists to identify them later in our code. So the right symbols will be the operators, and the top symbols will be for our functions. So clearing, positive, negative, and percentage, and everything else will be for the digits and the decimal place. And here I have the square root icon. So for this tutorial, we'll be covering all of the buttons except the square root one. I want you to figure this one out on your own after this tutorial. So these are button values, and I want to start by just identifying the colors that we'll be using for our calculator. So I just looked up what the calculator colors were, and you can see we have light gray, black, dark gray, and this orange color. And we're going to take the hexadecimal value for each one and save it as a string, which we can then reference later in our code. Alright, so our first color is light gray. And this is going to be hash D4, D4, D2. And then we have color black. This is going to be hash 1C, 1C, 1C. And then we have color dark gray, and this is going to be hash 505050. Color orange is going to be hash FF9500. And then finally, we have color white, and here we can just write the word white. So there are some basic colors in tkinter where you can just write out the name of the color. So you can put green, red, blue. In this case, I'm just going to use white. And one more thing I want to add is I want to keep track of how many rows and columns we have here. So we have 5 rows and 4 columns. So over here, I'm just going to create 2 more variables, row count. So instead of putting a hard-coded number like 5, I would just do a length of button values. So this would be 5. And then column count is going to be length of button values at index 0. So this is going to be 4. And so in the future, if you want to add more buttons, then you just need to change the code here and you wouldn't have to update the count in these 2 lines. Alright, so this is all we need for our setup for now. And let's start by creating our window. So to create the window, we would just do window and assign it tkinter.tk. So this is going to create the window, and we can add a title for our window. So I'll do window.title calculator, and I'll make it so that the user cannot resize the window by dragging on the sides. So I'm going to do window.resizable false and false. So this is for the width and height. And now when we create the window, we want the program to continue running so that the window stays open. So I'm going to do window.main loop. Okay, so let's save and run the program. And you can see we have our window over here. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to mention, for these button values, you don't have to write them out yourself. I will copy and paste it in the video description. And this is not the X symbol, but a multiplication symbol. So that's why you see this rectangle around it. So I just wanted to clarify those 2 things. Alright, so back to our window. Now that we have a window, the next thing we need to do is add some components to our window. And to add a component, we first need a frame to place the components in. So this is going to be our setup. Basically, the red box is the window, and inside the window, we're going to place a frame, which is the blue box over here. And within our frame, we're going to place our widgets. So these are the green boxes. So we're going to have one widget for the label, which is the display text. And then we're going to add 20 buttons. So we have 5 rows and 4 columns of buttons. Alright, so let's add the frame. So frame is equal to tkinter.frame. And here we need to specify the parent. So I'm going to do window. So basically we are placing the frame inside the window. And then after that, we need to create our first component, which is the label. So I'm going to do label is equal to tkinter.label. And here we're going to place the label inside the frame. So I'm going to specify frame as the parent. And we can also specify a bunch of properties. So if you hover over the word label in Visual Studio Code, you can see these are all the properties we can add. So I can add a text. And for now, I'm just going to make it display 0. And we can also specify a font. So font is going to be Arial. And the font size is going to be 45. And I can also set a background color. So background is going to be color black. And I can also set foreground. So foreground is the font color. So the color of our text is just going to be color white. Alright, so let's save and run the program. And you can see we have our window here, but we don't see our text label. And that is because we need to pack the label and then pack the frame. So here I'm going to do label.pack and then frame.pack. Alright, now let's save and run the program. And here you can see we have our label over here. And it is displaying 0. So instead of doing label.pack, I'm going to use a grid system. So the grid system works like this. You have rows and columns, just like with a 2D list, and you have indices. So we're going to place our label in the 0th row, and then our buttons are going to start from the 1st row all the way down to the 5th row, okay? So we're going to start by placing the text label over here. So I'm going to get rid of this line and I'll do label.grid. And here we need to specify the row and column index. So row is equal to 0 and column is equal to 0. All right, let's save and run the program. And you can see our window's over here and it's still the same size, but when we add our buttons, it's going to expand. So let's go ahead and add the buttons. So when we're creating the buttons, I'm going to iterate through this 2D list. So button values, I'm going to iterate through each row, and within each row, I'm going to go through each column. And for each one, we're going to create a button with the text at each index. Okay, so down here, I'm going to do for row in range, row count. For column in range, column count. And I'm going to get the value. So value is equal to button values at index row, column, and then I'm going to create a button. So button is equal to tkinter dot button. And we're going to place the button inside the frame, just like what we did with the label. So I'll do frame, and I can set the text. The text is going to be value, and I can also specify a font. So font is going to be Arial 30. And over here, we need to specify the width and height. So I'm going to make the width column count -1 and height 1. So with the tkinter library in Python, the width and height of our components would not be specified in pixels, but rather a different measurement called screen units. And I'm not going to go into too much details on what exactly is a screen unit, but in this case, I will make it width is equal to column count -1. So we have 4 columns. So if we do 4 minus 1, we have 3, and height is going to be 1. And you can play around with the numbers if you want, but for now, we'll keep it like this. And when we click on the button, we're going to call a command. So command is equal to, and I'll put a lambda function here. So lambda, and we need to specify the parameters. So the parameter is going to be value, and I'll make the value equal to value. So it's going to be this text value over here. And so the function that will be called is button clicked, and we'll pass in value. And down here, I'll just define the function. So button clicked, which will take a value, and we'll work on this function in a bit. So for now, I'll just put the word pass. That way we won't get a syntax error. Okay, so we've created the button and it's in the frame, but we want to order it in the grid layout, just like what we did with our label. So I'm going to do button.grid, and row is going to be row +1. And the reason we do +1 is because row goes from 0 to 5, but not including 5. So it'll be 0 to 4. But at row 0, we're putting the display label. So we're going to add 1 to shift the rows down by 1. And then column is just going to be column. All right, now let's save and run the program. And you can see we have our calculator over here, and we have the label and the buttons. Now there's one issue, and that is our text label is over here, and it's at row index 0 and column index 0. What we want to do is have this text label take up the entire column space. So let's go ahead and add that. So in our label.grid, I will do column span is equal to column count. So column span refers to how many columns this label should take. And I put column count, which is 4. So this label should take up 4 columns. So let's save and run the program. And you can see it's in the middle now. So this means that it's taking up 4 columns, but the color does not apply to all 4 columns. Instead, it only applies to where the text is. So we want to stretch out the color to take up all 4 columns. So to do that, I would just do sticky is equal to WE. So in tkinter, we refer to left and right, top and bottom using north, south, east, and west. So if you want the label to stretch from left to right, you would specify WE, so it would stretch from west to east. So let's save and run the program. And you can see the text label is now from west to east. Now there's one more thing I want to adjust, and that is the text is centered. Instead, we want to place it to the right. So over here in our label, I'm going to add another property, and that is anchor, and we're going to write E. So E stands for east. So we want to place the text in our label on the right side. All right, let's save and run the program. And you can see the text is now floating on the right side. All right, so we fixed the text label. Now the next thing we want to do is add colors to our buttons. So on the top, we'll make it light gray, and on the right, we'll have the buttons be orange, and for the rest of the buttons, which are the digits and the decimal place and the square root button, we'll make it dark gray. And with these two lists over here, we can identify what kind of value we have. So over here, I'm going to do if value in top symbols button.config foreground. So this is the font color. I'm going to make it color black, and background is going to be color light gray. Elif value in right symbols button.config foreground is going to be color white, and background is going to be color orange. Else, so this is going to be for the rest of the buttons, which are the digits and the decimal place and the square root button. I'm going to do button.config foreground is going to be color white, and background is going to be color dark gray. So let's save and run the program. And you can see we have our buttons nicely colored. So that's pretty much all we need for our user interface. Now the next step is to make the buttons do something when we click on them. And before we go on, I want to solve one issue, and that is when we open up our calculator window, it opens up to the side, and every time we open it, it opens up in a different location each time. So I want to center this window. So let's go ahead and do that first. To center the window, we need to get the current width and height of our window and screen and do some math. So I'm going to do window.update. Window.update is going to update the height and width properties after we've added all our components. And after that, we need to get the width and height of our window. So window width is going to be window.winfo width. And window height is going to be window.winfo height. And then we need to get the width and height of our computer screen. So I'm going to do screen width is equal to window.winfo screen width, and screen height is going to be window.winfo screen height. Once we've got the window and screen width and height, we can calculate the X and Y positions of our window. So I'm going to do window_X is equal to int of screen width divided by 2 minus window width divided by 2. And let's do the same for the Y position. So window Y is equal to int screen height divided by 2 minus window height divided by 2. And then finally, we need to update the window X and Y position based on the calculated values. So we're going to use this specific format, so window.geometry, and I'm going to use an F string. And with an F string, we can inject variable values into a string. So here I'm going to put the width, so window width, and we need to write X. And then over here, I'll do window height, and then we need to do plus symbol. And here, I'll do window_X plus window_Y. Okay, so the format is width times height plus X position plus Y position. So let's save and run the program. And you can see our window opens up at the center of our screen. So now all we need to do is make the buttons work when we click on them. So when we're doing calculations, we have 2 operands and 1 operator. So the operands would be A and B. So we would have A plus B. So it'll be operand, operator, operand. And then we have A minus B, A times B, or A divided by B. So we need to save all 3 of these values somewhere. So I'm going to create 3 variables. And for now, I'll set A equal to 0. And then operator is going to be none, and B is also going to be none. So when we're clicking on the buttons, we're going to be updating the display as well as these 3 variables. So earlier I had the command B button clicked and we passed in a value, and the value is the symbol on the button. So let's work on that function. So inside button clicked, we're going to check what value we have. And so I'm going to do global right symbols, top symbols, label, A, B, and operator. So we need to access the variables that we declared outside of this button clicked function. So that's why I declared that these variables are global. And the reason why we need to do so in Python is because if I did something like a is equal to 5, it's going to create a local variable called a that only exists inside the function. But what we want to do is access this a over here. So that's why we said global a, so that if there's any instance of this variable named a, it's going to refer to a global variable outside the function. All right, so we have our global variables declared, and we're passing in a value, which is the button symbol. So we're going to make a check to see which category our value falls into. So I'm going to do if value in right symbols. So these are the operator symbols and the equal symbol. So here I'm just going to do pass for now. Elif value in top symbols. So this is going to be for clearing, positive, negative, or percentage. And over here, I'll do pass as well. And then I'll do else. So if it's not in the right symbols or top symbols, then we have a digit or a decimal place symbol or the square root symbol. So as I mentioned earlier, for this tutorial, I'm just going to work on everything but the square root button. And within this category, we have two separate categories. We have either the decimal place or the digits. So I'll separate them here. If value is equal to decimal place, and then elif value is a digit, so in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So what happens if we click on a number? Well, it's going to add a number to the display. And before we directly add the number to the display, I want to make another check. And that is if label text, so the text property of our label component. So if the current label is a 0, then we're going to directly replace the 0 with the digit. So if it's a 0, we don't want to add another digit to the end because it will look like 05. We don't want the first digit to be 0. So instead of 05, we're going to replace the 0 with a 5. So if we have a 0 in the text label, I will do label text and set it to value. Else, if it is not a 0, then we can add the digit to the end of the text label. So I'll do label text plus equal value. Okay, so let's save and run the program. So I have the calculator over here, and if I put 5, you can see it replaces the 0, so we don't get 05, and I can add more digits to the calculator. And there's one issue, and that is if I keep adding digits, you can see there's not enough space for our text label to display all the digits, so it's going to expand, and when it expands, it's also going to affect the layout of our buttons. And to resolve the issue, I will just add a width property to our label. So width is going to be equal to column count. So this is the maximum number of screen units we want to have for our label. So let's save and run the program. So now if I click on the digits buttons, you can see it adds all the numbers, and if I add more numbers, it's going to shift to display the rest of the numbers, and it's not going to forcefully expand the layout. So for the decimal, we need to check something, and that is if value not in label text. So with the decimal place, you can only have one decimal point. So you can't do 5.5, you can only do 5.5. So if there's already a decimal point in our text label, then we shouldn't allow the user to click on the decimal button to add another point. So I'm going to do label text plus equal value. So if the decimal point is not already in the text label, then we can add it. Otherwise, click on the button will do nothing. All right, so let's save and run the program. And I can do 4.5. And if I try to add more decimal points, you can see nothing happens. So we have the numbers and the decimal place symbol. Now let's work on these three functions. So for the top symbols, we have clear, positive, negative, and percentage. So I'm going to do if value is equal to AC, elif value plus slash minus, so positive, negative. Elif value is equal to percentage. So I'm going to start with clearing because that is the easier one to do. And if we press on the clear button, basically we want to reset these variables back to the default state and set the text label back to 0. So whenever we press the numbers and operators, we are updating these variables. So if I press 500 plus, then A will be 500 and operator will be plus. And then if I click clear, it's going to reset these variables back to 0 and none. So I'm going to define that in a separate function. So I'm going to call clear all, and we need to specify that A, B, and operator are global variables, because if I take this and paste it in here, it's just going to create 3 separate local variables that only exist inside this function. So we want to update the variables outside of the function. So I'll do global A, B, and operator. So now any reference to A, operator, and B will refer to these 3 variables. So I'm going to call clear all. And then I need to update the display. So label text is going to be 0. All right, let's save and run the program. So I'll do 565.2 and then I click clear and it resets the label back to 0. So that is working fine. Now let's work on positive, negative, and percentage. So for positive, negative, I'm going to take the text label, convert it to a float, multiply it by -1, and then convert it back to a string and assign it back to the text label. So I'm going to do result is equal to float of label text times -1, and then I'll just convert this back to a string and assign it to text label. So string of result. Okay, so let's save and run the program. And then I'll do 500. And then I'll click on this positive, negative button. So now it's -500. Click on it again. We have 500, negative, positive, negative, positive. And one thing you might have noticed is when I put 500 and I click on negative, it did make it -500, but it added 0.0 to the end. And with a calculator, we don't want to display a decimal place if it's 0. The reason why this was added was because we converted the text to a float. And we can't just directly convert the text to an integer because we will lose any potential decimal places. So that's why we converted it to float. So what we can do is, before we assign it back to the label, we can make a check to see if there are any 0.0s that we can get rid of. So over here, I'm going to define another function, remove 0 decimal, and it's going to take a number value. So this could be a float or an integer, and I'll do if num mod 1 is equal to 0. So if I take a number and I mod 1 and there's nothing remaining, meaning no decimal places, then we have a whole number. So I'm going to do num is equal to int num. And then I'll return string of num. So I'm going to take this and replace string with this. So it's going to remove any 0 decimal and convert it to a string. All right, let's save and run the program. So now if I do 500, negative, we get -500, and then positive, and then I can clear. And the final button we need to work on for the top symbols is this percentage button. So this is just dividing by 100. So this one is going to be easy. I can just take this and paste it over here. And instead of multiplying by -1, I just divide by 100. So I'm getting the text label, converting it to a float, divided by 100. And if there are any zeros in the decimal place, I've removed them, convert it to a string, and assign it back to the text label. So let's save and run the program. So if I have 500 and I take the percentage of it, divide by 100, we get 5. Click on it again, we get 0.05. And then 0.005, and yeah, I can make it positive, negative, and clear. So that's all we need for the top symbols. Next, let's work on the right symbols. So with the right symbols, we have 2 categories. We have the equal symbol and we have the operators. So if value is equal to equal elif value in, and here I'm going to list out the operators. So plus, minus and I need to get the multiplication symbol. So remember, this is not an X, this is the multiplication symbol. So I'm just going to copy and paste that over here. And then we need to get the division symbol. So I'm going to copy and paste this over here. And let's start with the operators. So I'm going to do if operator is none, I'll do A is equal to label text, and then label text, we can set this back to 0, and I'll set B to 0. And then outside, I'll do operator is equal to value. So this might look confusing, but basically, we're making a check. If the operator is none, we will get the label and save it to A, and then update it to be 0. And then after that, we assign the operator the value. And this is because if I do 500 plus, we're going to save 500 to A and plus to operator. And if I click on any operator again, like multiplication, we don't want to update A again and replace it with 0. So that's why we make this check. If operator is none, then we update A. Otherwise, all we do is update the operator. So we'll still have 500, except the operator goes from addition to multiplication. So let's save and run the program. So if I do 500 plus, you can see 500 is now saved to A and operator is now addition. And if I click on multiplication, I don't want A to be 0. So A will still be 500, except now the operator changes to multiplication. All right, now the last thing we need to do is process the operation with this equal button. And a user can click on the equal button even though we don't have any values saved for A, operator, or B. So I'm going to do if A is not none and operator is not none. So if we have A and operator, then B is going to be whatever is on the text label. And so now we have A and B. I'll do num A is equal to float of A. And num B is equal to float of B. So we have both A and B converted to numbers, and now we can do the operation. If operator is equal to addition, I'll set label text equal to remove 0 decimal of num A plus num B. Elif operator is equal to minus. I can just copy and paste this over here and change this to minus. Elif operator is equal to the multiplication symbol. So I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. And then I'll copy this and paste it over here. Change this to multiplication. And then elif operator is equal to the division symbol. I will take this, copy and paste it over here, and change this to division. And then after we updated the label, I'm going to call clear all. So after we've done the calculation and updated the label, we don't need A, operator, and B anymore because we did the calculation. So I'm going to reset them back to their default state. All right, let's save and run the program. So I can do 500 plus 250, make it negative, and I can divide it by 15. I can add some more digits, 501.25 times 4. And I can add 20. And as you can see, we have a fully functional calculator. Alright, so that's all we have for this tutorial. You can continue to work on this calculator if you want. I definitely encourage you to work on the square root button. And you can also add some more buttons. You can add some scientific functions like cosine, sine, tangent, logarithm. You can also add some simpler functions like absolute value, power function, exponential, and you can also add another button that would delete the digits one by one so that we don't have to clear everything. So let's say if I accidentally put decimal point over here and I didn't mean to do that, you would click on that button to backspace by one character. So it would get rid of that decimal place. So those are just some ideas. You can also change the styling if you want. But yeah, that's it for this tutorial. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you give this video a like. And if you have any questions, let me know down below in the comments. And if you want to stay up to date for more tutorials like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.